Stop. Stop. I know what you're doing. I know you're going to the comments right now, and I know you're typing out a ridiculous response, calling me a hater, saying all this other kind of stuff without even watching the video. Just wait a second, okay? Allow me to explain myself. Now, the title of this video is exactly what this video is going to be. I'm going to talk about everything that is wrong with Krytac, but not for the reason you think I am. Not because I hate Krytac. Quite the contrary. Krytac is my favorite AEG on the market right now. I adore Krytac AEGs. However, here at Gun Gamers, nothing and no one is above criticism. And I figured that as an alternate perspective to all the glowing reviews that Krytacs get on YouTube and blogs and elsewhere, I figured I would objectively and honestly put out there everything that may or may not be a contrary factor to Krytac's awesomeness. And I'm purely doing this because I figure it's time we put it all in one place, because I've been using this particular Krytac CRB for almost 3 years. This is one of the first batch Krytacs that Airsoft GI had. And I have a Krytac LMG that I've had for just about a year at this point. And many of my teammates use Krytacs and many of my friends use Krytacs. So I've got a pretty good catalog of everything that's awesome and maybe not as awesome about Krytacs. They're still my absolute favorite AEGs on the market. VFC Avalons are hot on their heels though. I mean, you've seen the video on that. But I just want to objectively catalog here for people making the purchasing decision everything that might be off-putting, because someone's got to do it. So don't worry, I'm not here to hate on your favorite rifle. I'm just saying these are the things that are problems or could be problems with Krytacs. Let's start out with an obvious one. This is one that you see all the time in the Krytac owners group. Let's talk about the lower receiver. Now, Krytacs, both the Mark 1s and the Mark 2s, they're a bit notorious for seeing a lot of pictures of them with the lower receiver split at this arch between the lower body pin and then the heel, I'm going to call it. And the receivers, we see a lot of pictures of them broken there. Now, some people seem to think that Krytac's receivers are made out of sugar glass for how easily this apparently happens. I disagree, but that is a problem. And the reason that happens isn't because of why you would think. The reason that happens isn't necessarily because Krytac's low receivers are particularly weak. They're really not. I mean, they're pretty average airsoft quality receivers. The reason that happens is at least partially because the buffer tube screw in Krytac's stops short of engaging the gearbox at all. Now, on most other M4 AEGs on the market, I say most, at least the majority, the screw that retains the buffer tube to the lower receiver goes through the rear of the lower receiver and into the spring guide in the gearbox. And while that's not an immense amount of reinforcement, that is an extra point of contact, and that is an extra point of reinforcement that absorbs some of the shock of leverages or drops or impacts on this buffer tube and lower receiver. And that does help transfer some of the force into a larger surface area that can absorb that impact. Krytacs, because their buffer tube screw stops short and only goes into the rear of the lower receiver, do not have that reinforcement. Now, does this mean that the Krytac receiver is inherently incredibly weak? Not really. I mean, I've beaten this gun up really, really good over the past 3 years, but I did break the lower receiver on my Krytac LMG. I broke it after I literally speared it into the ground out of frustration because my $150 optics stopped working. So, by the way, that was a Sightmark red dot sight. Don't waste your money. Stopped working under the immense recoil of an AEG. But that was what it took for me to break the lower receiver on my Krytac LMG. I replaced the lower receiver and I've had no such problems ever since. Something I want to kind of take Krytac to task for, though, is you can't really find the Mark 1 lower receivers anywhere anymore, which is kind of strange considering the Alpha series still uses the Mark 1 lower receiver and considering there's still plenty of Mark 1 Krytacs floating around, but now you can't find the Mark 1 lower receivers anywhere to buy. I mean, what gives? Yes, the Mark 2 lower receivers still work, but Kind of seems odd to me not to keep some excess inventory on hand that you can sell in your pro shop, but that's just me. Another big one we hear discussed a lot has to do with the Mosfet and the electronics in the gun itself. Now, Krytac only recommends if you're using an 11.1 volt LiPo in your Krytac airsoft gun that you only go up to a 15C discharge rate. And they say that the electronics and the Mosfet in the gearbox are rated up to that. Which seems odd to me because I actually have yet to personally see more than one burned out Mosfet. And the only Mosfet I've seen burned out is the one I threw into a mud puddle, and it burned out because of that. But the Mosfet, I have seen people using higher discharge rate 11.1 volt LiPos. I have seen them start having overspinning and double cycling issues. Now, it seems kind of weird to me that it would have that kind of issue rather than, starting to burn out really. But as long as you keep it under that discharge rate, you're gonna be fine. And like I said, I haven't seen any burned out Mosfets personally, except for that mud puddle incident. And you're gonna be able to work around it, but it is kind of odd. And finding 11.1 volt batteries that are only a 15C discharge rate can be kind of tricky. So I know a lot of people just run these guns on 7.4s, which is fine. But like I said, it just seems kind of odd that this is a known weak spot in the electronics, and I kind of wish they would reinforce that, but I'm guessing that would bring the cost up, and it's always the eternal balance. Or it could also bring the size up, and this being an integrated Mosfet, that is a limitation as well. They do have to keep that within the gearbox for the price point and the size point. So I guess I get it, but that's a quirk to watch out for. Another potential issue that we see with Krytacs is the lack of a sector delayer. Now this was way more pronounced on my batch 1 Gen 1 CRB. I haven't heard nearly as many problems with this lately, but it is still a potential issue that I've heard of a couple of people having, and that is the lack of a sector delayer in the gearbox means that some people on high voltage batteries, or many batteries, will have failures to feed frequently on full auto. And that's because the sector gear is not keeping the tappet plate and the air nozzle, by extension, back far enough, long enough to allow proper feeding. On mine, I installed an SHS sector delayer chip, and that fixed the issue no problem. But on a lot of people's, I've heard of some people still having this issue. On my Krytac LMG, I haven't had to mess with it. On a 7.4 LiPo, it feeds great even with the box mag, which can notoriously be with any box mag, sometimes hard to keep up with higher rates of fire. But I figured I would mention this because, like I said, it was an issue I had with my CRB and might be something you could potentially run into. Speaking of the LMG, I figured I would reiterate something that I said in my Krytac LMG review, and that is that the Krytac LMG box mag is a bit of an odd duck, because rather than feeding continuously from one large reservoir, as with most box mags, it feeds from a top reservoir that you then have to tilt the box mag and turn it over to reload from a larger bottom reservoir. So you get, I want to say, somewhere around 800 rounds of continuous fire from this top box mag reservoir, maybe more, maybe less, and then the rest of it is stored in here, then you reload it, and then you keep going. And while the box mag feeds extremely reliably as a result of this, and the only real quirk is that you have to do that weird reload, it is still something to bear in mind that it is not a true continuous feed 3,500 round box mag, just in case that's important to you. Here's a very personal pet peeve of mine for something that is, in my opinion, wrong with Krytacs. I despise these hex key body pins. Anytime you bring your airsoft gun out into the field for a long period of time, and then something happens and maybe you need to clear out your hop up, maybe you need to switch upper receivers or lower receivers for some reason, having these hex key body pins is a massive pain. Now, you can slot them or you can replace them or do something like that. But in my opinion, and bear in mind, this is a personal factor, and I bring this up only because I have had enough people agree with me that I figure it warrants mention. These hex body pins are just more trouble than they're worth. Because like I said, if you need to disassemble in the field, that's another set of tools you have to bring with you, is a full Allen key set. And that's just, there's no reason for it. Captive body pins are far superior. Many other brands use captive body pins. They're not that difficult, or just a good friction fit set of body pins. Not that hard. I just think it's unnecessary to have these hex retainers. Or if you want to have retention on your body pins, make it flathead. I guess you can technically slot these yourself with a Dremel, but you know, that's when you're getting into sketchy territory of when you might strip it out because it's still got the hex head in there. Just make these either flathead or just get rid of them and do something else. The hex retainer is just unnecessary and more trouble than they're worth. Speaking of screws though, that's another thing I want to mention about Krytacs is I've noticed this more on a couple of the later Krytacs, and it varies from example to example. Krytac loves their Threadlock. Now this Mark 1 CRB, not as much an issue. My LMG and my buddy's LVOA, oh my God, Threadlock ridiculousness. And I was using the proper size tools. Bear that in mind. I was using the proper size tools. I have more than enough tools to do that. And I still was having issues where I could not get screws out. The most egregious example was on my buddy's LVOA. The screws for the pistol grip would not come out. And I ended up having to slot them and screw them out with a flathead because they completely stripped out using no matter what tools I tried. And that was a really egregious example of just too much Threadlock. And the motor grip is something you might have to open up every now and then. I mean, there's connectors in here that sometimes come off. It's not like you need to have that glued shut so that the customer can't get to it. In my opinion, that's something the customer should be able to get to for any reason. Motors burn out, motors have problems, connectors come undone. You can't seriously expect them to send it in every time that plug comes off. And it also becomes a problem in the buffer tube screw because the buffer tube screw is largely threadlocked in on a lot of them that I've seen. Now, you can alleviate some of the pressure by taking the castle nut and loosening it. They do tighten the castle nut to add pressure to that buffer tube screw. So if you don't have an AR wrench, a pair of pliers that you can put into these little notches will work. But if you have an AR wrench, use that, loosen the castle nut, and then you will probably be able to get the buffer tube screw out. But like I said, I've had examples where that thing just did not want to come out. And I ended up disassembling the gun without taking it out and just working on the gearbox with it tethered by the wiring harness. Other than that though, what other major issues do I have with Krytac? Honestly, not really any big ones. This video probably sounds nitpicky and it probably sounds like I'm talking about things that probably will never be an issue for you. Or it may not. Maybe you hear these things and you think, wow, those are kind of really big deals. Like I said, I'm kind of intentionally nitpicking just to play the devil's advocate on why, maybe a Krytac might not be the best choice for you if you're looking for certain things, or why maybe it is the best choice for you and these aren't big issues for you. I mean, like I said, the low receiver thing, I didn't have a problem with it except the one time I speared the damn thing into the ground. And I run a sling on all my Krytacs and all my rifles in general, so I haven't had the issue since. It's things to keep in mind, and it's ways in which I do still think Krytac could improve. My dream Krytac Mark III, if we're gonna start talking about pipe dreams here, would be to have a micro switch trigger with a higher rated Mosfet, some captive body pins, and a little less threadlock. But other than that, like I said, Krytacs are still my favorite AEGs on the market, still absolutely adore them, but I wanted to make this video, like I said, because I felt like someone had to make it. And if you've got more things that you want to say are wrong with Krytac, put those in the comments, Say what your experience was, say why you either like or dislike Krytac despite or because of this, and just let's have a discussion because nothing changes when you just stagnate by saying something is the best. Always say why it could be better, because that is how the market presses forward. But maybe I'm crazy. Anyways, this is Z-House from Gun Gamers. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're not too mad that I was either talking crap about your favorite gun or saying that these things didn't bother me personally. So I hope you still enjoyed this video. This is Z-House from Gun Gamers, signing off. On mine, I installed an SHS sector delayer chip, and that fish